Okay, if there was one thing about translators you could change, what would it be?
Oh, you go first. Welcome to the 3% Podcast. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books, here with Tom Roberts from Albertine and from New Directions. And this, as it turns out, happens to be our 100th episode of the podcast, which, I didn't check this. I meant to look like when we actually started this.
Oh.
Do you have any recollection?
I'm sure it's available on iTunes, right? If you go back far. It's when I started New Directions, so I'm guessing 2010.
Wow. Are you serious?
No, it would have been 2011, I guess. So, yeah, early 2011, I'm guessing.
Let's see. 3%.
You have to go into iTunes.
Yeah, I don't know that iTunes is going to have it because we had to switch, servers at some point in time, or our website stuff. I forget what the deal was. And I think they had to upload every single past episode individually.
Is it not on the blog?
That's what I'm trying to find, but I'm going back in time. But anyways, for the 100th episode, we thought we'd mostly just answer questions from the audience, but also talk briefly for a second about being in the middle of the 2015 World Cup of Women's Literature, which we did last year. We did the World Cup of Literature to match up with the men's competition that was going on, and use both male and female authors. All the books should have been within the last, I think, 14 years. I think we said from the year 2000 onwards. But the authors could be living or dead. And this year, so Bolaño beat out Valeria Luiselli in the championship match, which is pretty awesome. And overall, it worked out pretty well. There's a lot of good books and a lot of good competition. This year, we had to do it to match up with the Women's World Cup, which only has 24 teams, which makes it a bit more complicated. But we used only living authors and books that were within the past 10 to 12 years, in theory. There are a couple that I think are on the borderline, one being Thailand, because there's one female author, living author, who has a book available from Thailand, which is super depressing to know. But that was the only option we had.
Can I interrupt you here to say that you really should have paid attention to the graphics and the bracket that I sent you?
I know, because there's a lot of typos.
No, but not in my graphics?
Oh, I mistyped a couple of the names.
Oh, you did?
I think I gave them to you, and they were just wrong.
But you are also calling it on your blog
the Women's World Cup of Literature.
Yes.
And I just noticed that we have that different here. And
you've created a hashtag which makes it irrevocable. So I'm gonna have to change all the graphics.
But It's just that one square, isn't it?
But it's on the bracket too.
Yeah. It's on the bracket. That square.
I mean, it's easy enough for me to fix. It's just.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that until this moment when I said that. I had never noticed that. The first podcast went live on April 27th of 2011.
I was right. Early, because I started at New Directions at the end of 2010, and then.
Dude, that was 4 years ago.
4 years, 100 episodes, so 25 a year. That's one every other week. That's not bad.
No, that's not bad at all.
It's bad.
Amazing that the first episode was about literary revolutions, awards, and death rays. And it says, the description says, talk about the Penworld Voices Festival, the upcoming Best Translated Book Award ceremony, and talk about Vladimir Sorokin, his Siberian earth fuckers, and how he's not really like Bolaño, the overratedness of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and the Hungarian author Laszlo Krasznahorkai.
Interesting. So it hasn't changed one bit.
No, it's pretty much exactly the same.
We've evolved not at all.
Oh, man. Except we've added more rants.
We have added rants and raves. Yes, that's true. Well, there tend to be more rants.
This is true. That is very true. There's not a lot of raving. It's usually like a rave couch or rant couched inside of a rave.
But to go back to the Women's World Cup of Literature, which I really think it should be World Cup of Women's Literature, like to get the focus in the right place. But
I could change the hashtag. It doesn't really matter. I only used it twice. I mean, those 2 times were yesterday and today.
All right. Well,
because I just did it because it's the Women's World Cup. And
yes.
just added of literature was my thinking on it. But you're right that the focus should be on women's literature, not on the Women's World Cup.
Right. But that's more work for you to go into all those posts that you've already put up.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas I only have to change 2 things. So
yeah, okay, whatever.
And you do have a point about it being called the Women's World Cup. So
which is God. It just you said today that Yahoo Sports hates the Women's World Cup. Everyone seems like ESPN could give 2 shits about this thing. Like if you go to their scores for soccer, it's like every other league throughout the world. Like the 3rd ranked like Brazilian league, the scores for that are listed above the Women's World Cup, and it's not alphabetical either, which is what I first thought. It's just that they just put it at the very bottom.
And Champions League is over, right?
Yeah.
Like, this should be the biggest thing going on.
Absolutely. I mean, the only thing that's even close is the Copa America, but that's different.
It's not that the Yahoo app doesn't, put it on there very high up. The Yahoo app runs based on what sports you tell it you want to see scores for.
Uh-huh.
And so, as seasons end and whatever, like in a week, I will be deleting NBA from my feed because nothing goes on and it just clogs up the space, right? So I was looking to add Women's World Cup, and I'm scrolling down, and I finally see this thing that says World Cup, and I'm like, okay, that's a little weird. Maybe it's both of them, whatever. And it showed me the scores from the men's final last year, and I was like, that's not helpful. And I could not. It's literally not on there. You cannot add the sport, the Women's World Cup, to your feed on Yahoo Sports app.
Jesus Christ!
So that really sucks.
That's really frustrating. I know that I haven't been doing a lot of tweeting for this because I'm trying to take a vacation, but I think there should be a lot more people should be following this too because of like the hashtag Read Women 2015 stuff and like just the interest in bringing more attention to women's literature. This seems to fit right into that political statement and moment. So I wish people would really get on board and start preaching about this competition because there are some really big books in here too.
Yeah, there are. Some of them lost already. I was a little confused by that. But
you want to take 2 seconds to the main complaint? So not all of the matches have run yet for the first round. There's 12 matches in the first round. Each of the 24 teams will play. And the one that you're referring to, I think half of them have run so far, just over that. We're recording on Tuesday. No, today's Monday. We're recording on Monday. So there's still a week of these to go online. But the one that you're referring to is that France and Virginie Despentes' Apocalypse Baby lost to Mexico's Texas the Great Theft by Carmen Boullosa, which upset you.
It upset me mainly because I think Virginie Despentes is should win this whole fucking thing. I just if there's a beacon, a pillar of women's literature, contemporary women's literature out there right now, it should be her. I mean, she just does whatever the fuck she wants, and it's beautiful and it's thought provoking, and it should be everything everyone wants in a book, and I don't know how anyone, I think we said it when we were on the podcast when we had Julie on there and talked about it for the book club. This is a book for everyone. I don't know anyone who would not enjoy this book, and it's smart on top of that. And I don't know.
I think we're gonna get a response via Twitter or the Gmail account from Patrick Smith or PT Smith explaining his pick of Mexico's book over.
He didn't like the ending, which
that's right. He did say that, didn't he?
I mean, that seems. I don't know.
We haven't talked about it on here, and he doesn't really talk about it in his review either, because it's sort of a big spoiler.
Did you dislike the ending? Did you have an issue with the ending?
I didn't really have an issue with it. I mean, it's not really that it comes out of nowhere. It is much bigger than the rest of the book. So there's a shift in perspective from something that's sort of close-knit to something much, much broader, but I didn't have a problem with it because it sort of spirals out from the other things. So no, I did not. But I also have not read Texas. So I should sort of withhold everything, but I was surprised too.
I've not read Texas either, but hey, look. Anyway,
we can talk more next week about this too.
You're not here to, complain about refereeing. We do that enough.
Yeah, Jesus. I don't know. Like now that that's out, I think the big favorite would have to be Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake. It's probably the most known book, most read book that's on here. Yeah,
didn't Kate Atkinson lost too, right?
Kate Atkinson lost to Columbia's Delirium.
Which I know nothing about, so...
I know that book exists. I've heard about it a billion times, and it sounds like something I would really enjoy, but I've never picked it up. But it's been around for a while. She's, like, sort of a big deal from Columbia. But yeah, I don't know about this Life After Life. Like, it sounded a lot like... I never really paid attention to it. I just knew it was got a lot of good reviews and, like, praise. But the description of it sounds a lot like the book that you guys do, The End of Days.
That was an issue when we were publishing it, that we were a little concerned people would think that Jenny was ripping her off, even though I think they were written basically concurrently.
It seems right, because Life After Life just came out a couple of years ago.
Right, and Jenny's book, I mean, we translated it.
Yeah.
So, it was published in Germany long before we did it. So, in the end, it was just something we decided not to address in any way, shape, or form. If people wanted to draw that conclusion, so be it. We weren't going to run away from it or deny it or anything. It's just, we didn't feel like it was a favorable comparison to make. Yeah. Even though Kate is such a well-known and well-respected writer of that particular genre, I think they were different enough to... And I haven't read that book by Kate Atkinson. Yeah. I have read... I'm totally blanking on the name.
Case Histories?
Case Histories. And to me, that doesn't seem anything like Jenny's style, even if the themes and plot might be similar. Unless, Atkinson really changed her style. I couldn't imagine how you would, confuse the two books or accuse them of sort of piggybacking or anything you wanted to,
right.
Call. But yeah, I was still shocked that it lost. I mean, this is the peril, I suppose, of having one person judge these things is, there's no arguing with taste.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of like the one and done in the NCAA tournament or, the one and done of the World Cup after the group stages. It could be a really close game and then it comes down to one play.
Yeah. One penalty kick.
One penalty kick. And that's what seems to be the case in both of these, matches that we've been discussing sort of is that, they were deemed really close, but you got to pick a winner. So
right,
that's it. One of them goes on and one goes home.
I might be mixing these up and or paraphrasing incorrectly, but I feel like Delirium won in part because it had a humor involved, and Life After Life did not. And that was like the one distinguishing tip.
I'm actually on that page. Let me see here. I did remember it did go to penalties, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Match ends tied 2-2 as both novels trade gracefully executed points. But Delirium pulls through with a final merciless goal in stoppage time.
Right here. I choose Delirium as the winner due to its streamlined complexity and ability to incorporate cheerful relief into an otherwise serious storyline. It made me laugh more often. Life After Life is gorgeously written, but it's pretty bleak up until the very end.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
A little bit of humor does help.
Yeah, I mean, it offers, there's one thing I hate about the so-called serious novels or something sometimes, and a fair amount of genre novels, especially the kind of stuff I read. It's so much better when you can fit a few appropriate jokes in there because, when Pulp Fiction came around and it was shocking at first, but gallows humor is a real thing, these horrible situations do cause by happenstance moments of levity and moments that if you just take one tiny step backwards and reflect on offer, some weird sense of humor if you're perceptive to it. So fair point on that part. Anyway, let's move on. We honor our listeners. I don't know. How many listeners do we have?
I don't know. I have to ask Nate to check on his weird system where it tells him like these numbers that we believe are number of downloads, but it's usually between 400 and 600. And it goes up over time, obviously, as more people. So the first couple days, a bunch of people will listen, and then it'll just keep growing. So like usually the most listened to episode is like the one from 3 weeks ago.
Right. I still think the one with Alex about translations and contracts. I mean, I still see people tweet about that all the time. So
me too. That one was a huge one. That might be much higher. I haven't asked him to look in a while. I will and see if I could put it on this post.
So I'm going to start with an email we got from someone named Natasha Gilmore.
Okay.
I don't know this person, do you?
I don't either.
She forwards an email, but then adds on a question for your 100th. What will assuage me now that books from Finland will no longer grace my inbox? And apparently, books from Finland was
I knew what that is. Yeah, it's part of like the Finnish government that would send out I don't know how often it was, but it would be like reviews and information about Finnish books. But is it ended?
Yeah, it's going to archive form. It is done.
What? That's ridiculous. Yeah, that's stupid and unfortunate. I did not know that.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of like blaming it on the government. Blah blah blah. Wow, it's been around forever.
Yeah.
I get these to my New Directions email about Polish books. Do you get that one?
Yeah, I get the Polish one too. There's a couple different ones. There's an Italian. It's not really about books. It's just like general things that are going on in culture at the place in New York where they have a lot of their events. Someone's not quite as interesting, but this one was pretty good.
The Finnish one,
yeah.
All right. So, do you have an answer for Natasha? What email newsletter or something along those lines could she subscribe to?
Jesus, that's something like this. Oh man, I do not know. I think if there's any other one that nothing's coming to mind. Do you have any that you can think of?
No, I mean. The other, like you were saying, like, you know, the French embassy has one, but it covers
everything,
all the culture. Yeah, pretty sure the German book office has one.
They do,
but that's German, not Finnish. So there's that. I did mention there's a Polish one. I have no idea how I got on that list in any way. I don't know the last time New Directions did a Polish book. I'm sure we've met with.
You know what? I have an answer for her, actually. Do you know Marlene Seegers and the what is it called? Two C's agency, the number 2 and then C's SEAS agency. She is an agent and sort of, I guess, that for a variety of places. There's a bunch of, she's like the sub-agent for a lot of international publishers, and she puts together a newsletter that's every other week or so that's partially about like her travels and her finding out about books, but also about books that they're sold or things that she's heard about, and it does fit that category. I bet Natasha would actually really appreciate this because it's sort of like a broader version of the books from Finland and a little bit more personal at times, but you can sign up on their website, I believe. And it's
it's the number 2?
The number 2 is 2 C's SEAS agency.com. So okay. I'll run up number 2 SEASAGENCY.com. Yeah, and then you can sign up to their monthly e-newsletter, and they're usually like a lot more, they're a bit chatty. They have like more information about travel, books that haven't been translated, ones that have been sold to be translated, all that kind of information. And I think it's a decent replacement.
I don't think we should rule out the distinct possibility that she was being sarcastic.
About books from Finland?
Yes. Just saying.
Okay, fair enough.
Just saying. All right, moving on. Our friend Tony Malone down in Australia, who has written to us before. His name has graced this podcast before.
Unfortunately, I've been on a big anti-Australia rant because of this Deladova character.
Oh my God! So I was just in Geneva for a week. Because a good friend of mine who was in Peace Corps with me, an American, obviously, who he now works for WWF, which is a little odd for me considering one of my other best friends works for what used to be, or writes about what used to be WWF. It's a weird, confusing thing. Anyway, so he lives in Geneva. He's lived there for a long time, and I'd never been to visit him. So I went, and turns out he is friends with a lot of Australians. And, you know, I like most of them, but yeah.
So you just took a very specific complaint and just grouped it into a whole bunch of like disliking a lot of Australians.
Oh no, they had plenty to say about where they come from. Don't doubt it. They are aware of the perception of Australians around the world, and they admit that most of it is true. Just like all of the bad stereotypes of Americans abroad are mostly true.
Very much the case.
Anyway, so this is not a short question. Okay. Having listened to Monica Carter talk about the BTBA judging on the recent podcast and having wrestled with the issue as part of a shadow panel for the IFFP, which is what?
The Independent Foreign Fiction Prize.
Okay. I'm wondering what your personal take is on these translation awards and what we want out of them. Are they there to promote fiction in translation in general? Or is finding the quote-unquote best book of the year a more important goal? For me, it's the latter. But in the real world, outside my head, it seems that it's all about the former, with the IFFP long list having clear genre picks and a focus on readability, and Monica talking about, quote, balance, unquote, in terms of publishers, languages, gender, countries, and having a pulse, in parentheses, or not. How do you see it? Do you find it important that the best book win, or is the whole process about raising awareness? And then parenthetically, with the identity of the winner being virtually irrelevant.
And I have mixed. So I think that with the Last Lover winning, that was a clear vote in favor of the best book over the most readable book or like largest audience-based book.
Yes. But let me pause here to address the philosophical belief of mine that best is incredibly subjective.
Yeah. I think the way that I'm going to interpret his best and like the best book is most patently literary.
I would agree with that. But even the definition of literary is quite broad. I mean, it doesn't all have to be Ulysses with how many different perspectives, and, be over 1,000 pages and have allusions to other literature every 3 sentences. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are a lot of different definitions for this, I think.
Yeah, there's also Franzen. He's considered literary fiction. To be the opposite of Ulysses is Jonathan Franzen. No, I know. I'm just trying to narrow it down for one, because we know what he's talking about. What he means is like the more complicated, challenging, difficult, literary in that sense, and the high modernist and continuing onwards sense is the book that I think he's referring to as like, does that book win versus the book that's equally intellectually satisfying, but is of a type that will appeal to a broader and more easily comprehensible to a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't personally equate challenging with good. I don't need challenging. I think somebody like Valerius Louis-Hilly's book is not particularly challenging in its language, and she very gracefully explains the illusions that she has.
Which one are you talking about, though?
Both of them, I guess.
Yeah, I would say the first one's more challenging than the second.
Okay, but on the spectrum of challenging, I mean, neither one of them is, correct.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know.
And I still think they're very good.
Yeah.
I still think her book was probably at the top there in the judging. I don't know. I don't think it necessarily has to be challenging. I just like that idea. But I do understand what you're saying. That, it should be literary. Her book is definitely literary, and it is modern, and it is, very thought. For me, what I consider good is the ability to draw in a lot of different things. And whether, the plot is, like narrow-mindedly focused on, take Liz Spector, for example, the woman in her pantry killing and eventually eating a cockroach, like how the plot is non-existent beyond that. Yet it's incredibly literary because of all the things she's managed to draw out from her own experience that relate to the situation she's in. To me, that's literature, is that ability to do that. It's what Javier Marias does so well. It's what Bolaño did so well. It's what I think Despentes is doing very well currently. That sort of thing, like that ability to just drag the whole world into, what seems like a very nothing a little plot. But that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be challenging. Would that be fair?
Okay. Yeah.
So to me, then let's get back to the question.
Yeah, that's yeah.
I think that the challenge, I think these things should exist to find the best book. Because if you start doing what he's suggesting the IFFP is doing, throwing in genre books and that sort of thing, just for the sake of throwing them in, you start degrading the respectability of the winner and the prize itself. I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just saying that's the risk you run when you make that a commonplace thing year after year after year.
Right. I agree with that too. There in an ideal world, there could be more prizes for things that sort of fall into genres or into other categories as well, which is fine. Like like the Edgar Award or the Hugo Award or the Nebula Award or whatever are addressing the fact that those books aren't going to win the Pulitzer Prize.
Right.
And that's fine. I do know that there's some balance. I feel like there should be some balance between like where you're searching for, what book you're trying to give the award to for being the best, and how you're defining best within that particular year, that group of judges, that moment, and like some balance as to like the importance of the award. So you don't want to degrade the award, but the award can have power in a sense, and should be aware that it does have some sort of power to it.
Right.
So there's some balance there.
Yes, and to deny that would be, foolhardy, and that's, that's the road to ruin, if you ask me. And so, yes, you should use the long lists. I think we're sort of sitting on the fence here, but I do think it is okay and encouraged even to sort of use the long list to get books on there and get them a little bit of attention that they might not otherwise have, because that's what the prize can do and should do, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out which books he's referring to from the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize's long list.
He's referring to what Monica said on our podcast, which,
right. Okay.
And I think she didn't specify anything.
Okay.
She was just talking about it in general. I'd have to go back and listen, but I feel like she wasn't very specific about most things, just to sort of keep the judging process, secretive, which it should be.
The thing that I do think is the difference between the two awards, I know we talked about them there too, is that the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize tends to have a emphasis on like importance of the content and like the politicalness of the nature of the content and the story and the meat of it. And the BTBA tends to traditionally has like favored books for their style and their structure more so than like the message within.
Yes, I would agree with that, but I think that's more a factor of the people who've been the judges.
I think so too. But I think that if you're to try and determine or try and look at the two next to each other, that's the one thing that you could sort of like as a Venn diagram make the two circles.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Did we forget something in his question? I feel like that was the meat of it.
I think so too.
But yes, the best book should win. That is the answer. How
you define best is what becomes the question.
Right. Let's move on. This is the one from Facebook.
Oh yeah, from Kari, yeah.
Which I have to admit, it came through very oddly.
Did it get screwed up? Okay, so I emailed it to myself or to that, so I would not forget about it. So I can pull it up on Facebook and read it from here. Basically, I think the question was, we were talking about, he had sent me a bunch of the articles related to China being the guest of honor at BEA and how it was sort of a shit show, right? That there was like and there's always the problems with like the Chinese government including certain authors and not including others because of censorship issues. Then there was like an article in the New Yorker that was, I mean, it's kind of made the whole thing seem pretty amateurish. It's like they're just not aware of how the book business would work here. It also included a very strange Franzen quote in which he's like, well, I understand why there would be censorship in China because you need to keep people in line sort of thing, which is very weird. But anyway, so then he said, well, when you guys are dealing with publishing books, from societies with official censors going over the books. Let me tell one little story to make this very interesting too. So at Book Expo, I talked to the people, the CEO of Overdrive, the company that works with libraries to give you ebooks and audiobooks that you can check out from libraries throughout America, right? And I was talking to him because they had highlighted our cover of one of our books, Obstructed Thieves. So I just started talking to him, and he started telling me this story about how they now have a partnership with China where they got whatever license was necessary so that they can sell English language books to I think it was 500 million English language readers in China through Overdrive. However, to be able to include any book that they want to sell there or to have the libraries purchase and allowed to be checked out, it has to go through 2 censors first. So there's 2 censors in China reading every book that Overdrive wants to be able to sell there. So he's like, well, so far there hasn't been any problems because they obviously took out anything involving like Tibet or questionable things that would question the Chinese government. So they're, being safe and being like not trying to cause any trouble with it. But that's a really crazy scenario for any number of reasons. And so Kari's question was like, coming out of those things, like, for Open Letter New Directions publishing books written in societies with official censors, has that ever affected our work? For instance, publishing translations that are based on versions that are different than the officially published ones in that country. And to my knowledge, I've never been involved with anything like that.
I would agree. To the best of my knowledge of New Directions, we've never done anything like that. If we have published books from people living or who had been living in societies like that, we would have only published them or even come across them, I would think, if they had gotten out and were writing the book in exile.
Yeah. So, like, didn't you, you guys did, whatchamacallit, right? Bei Dao?
Yeah.
And he is out of China.
Yes.
And that's why his books are uncensored in your editions.
Yes. I don't know that they were ever published in China, though.
I don't think they were either. But if they were, then they probably would have been.
Having met him, I can't imagine they were. I can't imagine he would like allow that to happen, like to be censored. Like that just seems incredibly crazy. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they were published in like Hong Kong or something, but not mainland China. I don't know. I personally don't think we would ever get involved with that. I don't
think so either. I mean, I guess the question, the interesting scenario with it would be if we just don't know. Like, if we were publishing a book that seemed really interesting from a Chinese author, and for whatever reason we're unaware that it was in some way censored or there was a different, more unexpurgated version, like, we would probably want to publish that one, but we may just not have any idea. I was and also thinking of, like, people's self-censorship within, like, the Arabic world, too.
Right.
Like, there might be issues with that, and it'd be quite possible that authors would get in touch afterwards and be like, actually, use this version for your translation, which I hope they would do.
So we did, I'm going to have to look up, give me a second. The Egyptian author.
Ibrahim, is that Sanala?
Sanala Ibrahim. So he was in prison and then he wasn't, don't ask me how long, 7 years or something like that, 3 years?
Yeah.
And then when he got out, or he had been in prison writing this book and, secretively. And I think I don't think the book was published anywhere for a long time. He had gone into exile. He's since returned to Egypt. But I think, it took regime changes for anything to allow him to be able to publish the book. So there was no censorship going on. There was straight out, no one was going to publish this book.
Right.
So there's that situation. But yeah, I mean,
yeah, it's weird. Apparently, that book that the book that you're talking about, and I'm writing these down to try and keep track, is That Smell.
That Smell in Prison and Notes from Prison, which are two different things in the same book.
So That Smell was supposedly published in Arabic in 1966, which would have followed his. He was in jail for 7 years. It was one of the first writings in Egyptian literature to adopt a modernist tinge. But then it was published in English translation in 1971. Until the translated versions were released in 2001, it was the only work of his available in English. Huh. Yeah, that would have been one that would have been weird.
But my point of view would be, and if I suddenly was interested in a book that came across my desk from, I'm trying to think of a scenario in which this makes sense. Like let's say a revolutionary-minded lesbian Russian writer still living in Moscow who publishes her books in Moscow, and I was interested in translating one of these, I would ask her a million fucking times if there was any censorship going on. And quite honestly, I would probably refuse to do it if only for her own safety. Right? I mean, if she's still there.
Right. If there's, yeah.
I mean, that just seems crazy to put her in that situation.
Right. We did the book. This wasn't censored, but Svetlana Alexievich's Voices from Chernobyl. She is out of Russia when she was publishing a lot of her books because she had written Zinky Boys about their conflict with Afghanistan, and the Russian government did not much appreciate that at all. And she was like in danger. Her life was in danger for a very long time. But she was already
out of there.
She was out of there by the time that was written. I don't think that if she had been in there, it would have been very dangerous for her to have that book published.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a separate issue from dealing with a censored text.
Right.
But, I mean, the only way that the scenario this person is asking, I believe, could come about would be, decades passing in between, the original publication and the English translation. And like I was saying, like a regime change would have to happen.
Right.
Before I would even, think of, digging deeper to see what had happened. Anyway.
Very true.
So that's, the grim state of censorship in the modern world. I think we have one more person who wrote in. I think, as you had hinted before we started, it's probably not just one question, but it is 5. So this is from Margaret Carson, who is currently co-chair of the Penn Translation Fund with Alex Zucker, and a translator for you, having done what does he do? JFEC.
Yep.
Sergio Chafek's books. Anything else? Margaret Carson. She is around. You will see her in New York at events.
Yeah.
And she listened to our podcast, apparently. I didn't know. So she has 5 questions here. I'm going to go in an order that I seem from easiest to hardest.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sounds good.
What was your most listened to episode? I believe I already answered that. It had to be with Alex. Define grand slams in terms of the world of translation.
Oh, right. I forgot about that one. It's like if a book could win both the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize and the Best Translated Book Award and the Oxford Wiedenfeld Translation Award. What is that, actually? That Susan just won, actually, for the same book. Wiedenfeld Translation Prize. That would be 3. And then I guess the National Translation Award from Alta. If you could win those 4 awards, you would win the Grand Slam of Translation. 2 American, 2 British.
I'm trying to think if there's another way in which this could be interpreted. I mean, I really wish there was a book I could point to that, like, did all of these things, made the bestseller list for whoever published it in order to buoy their coffers and get people reading other books like it. That would be great.
I guess it matters. It depends on how you're interpreting the phrase Grand Slam. Like, what is it the best? Is it the hit that can maximize your runs, or is it the Grand Slam of tennis?
Right.
I was thinking of the Grand Slam of tennis.
I think more in terms of baseball, but because if you could have something like that's highly regarded literarily, also a bestseller, and then like got optioned and turned into an awesome movie, that would be fantastic, right?
I was going to give a very practical one of the Grand Slam being reviewed by James Woods and then ending up on the bestseller list. So Knausgaard. It's at least a home run. It's at least a home run.
I don't think he's on the bestseller list.
He was.
Was he?
Yep.
Wow.
Like last week.
So Knausgaard is the contemporary version of a home run. I guess Garcia Marquez, back when everybody and their mother was reading 100 Years of Solitude.
The Elegance of the Hedgehog.
Yeah, that doesn't have much literary...
God, that book is the worst. I cannot stand that book.
So yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah, it's on there now. Or no, sorry. May 17th. It was number 15. My Struggle Book 4.
Oh wow, good for them. So I think that's a loose definition of Grand Slam. How many books do you and Tom read in a given year, and what percentage are translation?
I wrote this down.
I have never kept track until this year. But I can tell you right now, I think I was looking yesterday that I had read 19 books so far this year. So I'm on track to read, let's call it 40, maybe 50 when I go on vacation for a whole month. And I think 13 of them were translations. So what's that, 65%? I think it's a pretty typical year for me.
I have data going back a lot of times, so I can actually give this is super nerdy, but I'm going to tell you this anyways. So starting in 2010 and going forward, I read 61 books, 80, 72, 111, 80, and so far this year, 43. And every year, the translations were 32, 53, 47, 75, 43, and 24. It's always between 55 and 67%.
Wow.
And that's pretty much normal, too. So the 111 was a year I read a lot of poetry books. That's why that one's much higher than the other years. But usually like 80 to 100, depending on how long some of them are.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I know in August I'm going to read 20 books. It's going to be that's how it goes. Probably a lot of them won't be translation though. I don't know. So I think we're in the same boat percentage wise. But yeah, you just read a lot more. I don't know how. I mean, obviously, I read a lot more than the average person. Which is
it's just like 4.
Yeah. So when I was in Geneva last week, all my friends work for, very large international, humanitarian or whatever organizations. And when they asked what I did, I told them, and they're like, "Wait, people still go to bookstores?" I was like, "Well, you wouldn't know it from here because I've seen like 2 bookstores in all of Geneva."
Oh my!
And it doesn't. I didn't see anybody reading in the parks or like on the subway or whatever. It's just not really a literary sort of place. I just couldn't believe she said that. I was like, "Yeah, people do." She's like, "People just don't buy them online." I was like,
"They do that too."
They do that too, but people still actually go to bookstores. Clearly, these people were not readers. Like they just no.
Yeah.
Just, whatever. These people take their jobs very seriously and devote a lot of time to that. And they're doing good for the world in a different way. So whatever. But yeah, get some culture,
They're too busy. There's so much wealth in like finance in Geneva too that.
Yeah.
And books are like the opposite of that.
Yeah. It's funny, my friend, who's never going to hear this because he blatantly admitted it to me, he said he didn't know I was doing this podcast with you. And then he said he tried to listen to a couple episodes and got like 10 minutes in and was just like, I had no fucking idea what you were talking about.
That's fantastic.
So.
Oh, God.
Good to know. Anyway, so yeah, those are our numbers. I'd be curious what other, literary people
I'd be
numbers.
curious to know what translators read. Because I know, like, booksellers read probably more books than anyone, and a wider variety, I think, on average, of, like, scope. They're aware of more things. They generally read more because they're surrounded by books their whole lives, their whole jobs, everything like that. I'm curious about translators, because they're the ones that can help support part of the industry. Do they buy a lot of translations and read them, or are they reading things that are not translated just because they're dealing with that in their job and they'd rather read something that's more escapist rather than something that just keeps hitting back at the same idea?
It's an interesting question. And, what's it like? Do you even want to read when you're in the midst of translating for 4 months straight?
Yeah. And you want to do anything other than something with books?
Right. Yeah. That's a good question. So
someone should answer that. Email us.
Yes.
3%podcast@gmail.com.
And I have 2 more here. Okay. If there was one thing about translators you could change, what would it be?
Oh, you go first.
I don't really deal with them directly in the terms of the editing process. So
yeah, I don't have any problems with that. That's usually pretty good. It's more, I think there's one thing I'd change. It's an awareness that they are not the only thing we're dealing with. It's more of like the personal email, and this would be true for so many people. Authors can be the same way, of like just this inability to understand that, like, a publisher's job is not to respond to their question or complaint immediately, constantly, that we have many other things going on other than just dealing with that one translator or author or whomever. I think an awareness of that would be helpful. An awareness of what our whole job is the one thing I would change.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to, now that you say that, I'm trying to, give a number or something like that to the amount of time, not just me as a publicist at New Directions, dealt with in terms of like dealing with authors / translators, and then dealing with all of the other things that one does when one has that job, especially at a small publisher. I mean, if we do it by days, to 1 day a week, I would say I probably spent face-to-face or over the phone or via email talking to translators or writers in terms of like strategy and, moving forward and just talking about things. And then 4 out of 5 days a week was either, preparing materials for the book in-house with New Directions, or dealing with printers and, that sort of thing. Just even in like the small way that I had to do it, and I'm not even the production person. And then dealing with distribution, just because, as a publicist or the publisher, if you're Barbara, like you have to keep your eye on all of that all the time, because, how the books are represented by your distributors, by your sales force is key. And then there's a lot of like minutia wrapped up with all of that in terms of sales, and then reaching out to booksellers, and the media is just massive. So, let's say a couple hours a day, out of an 8-hour day should be, all a translator should expect, in terms of attention. And, there are certain times when in the process of publishing a book that those numbers will change, that those percentages will change.
Yeah.
But in general, I agree with you. It's kind of understanding their role in the much larger scope, the business of publishing not just one book, but all books that we do. And that's the other thing is on top of understanding that, they're not the only one, the stake in what happens, it's that we're also publishing 3 other books that month.
Yeah, exactly.
And whatever, 30 other books that year. So, it's there's a lot going on. That I think is the point. There's a lot going on. And then it's not, an attempt to slight their inputs or, ignore it or anything like that. It's just, we have a lot going on, and sometimes, you got to prioritize it.
Exactly.
And that's just what it comes down to. And like you said, translators, this is not just translators. This is reviewers do the same thing to me. Writers do the same thing to me. Booksellers occasionally do the same thing to me and get, very impatient. And I do a damn good job of getting people back to people right away. So
yeah, much better than most people. I always feel like I'm just way behind on that, on email, and just overwhelmed. Like, we don't even get time at the office to work on fundraising, which is like the most important thing that we should be doing. So, like, yeah, answering emails becomes like one of those things I dread, or it has over the years.
Yeah, I don't know. It's always been my goal to just get these things out. If you can respond. Get it out of my way,
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I would say that the translators, need to understand that there's a big machine at work. Even if it's just a little machine like New Directions or Open Letter, it's still a big machine involving, upwards of 50 or 60 people at any given time.
Yeah.
And the last one that Margaret had written in here: if a child very dear to you said, "I want to be a literary translator when I grow up," how would you respond?
Oh, goodness. I would be totally fine with that. I mean, my response would be like more of an explanation of what the challenges would be, but I would encourage it in the sense that I would encourage that person to go live overseas, to become immersed in whatever culture it is, and to find enjoyment within that. And if someone wants to do something like that, they're not doing it for a bad reason.
No, of course.
So it's something that I would only encourage.
Totally agree. And, the cynical way of answering that question, if I'm not sure I would say this to a child, but, if one of my friends at the bar that I don't know very well or something, friend of a friend or something, told me he was going to quit his job in finance to become a literary translator, I'd be like, don't quit your job.
That's a terrible idea.
But you could still be a literary translator, just don't quit that other job.
Right.
It's hard to make a living only doing that. And I think most translators are well aware of that.
Yep.
But that would be the thing to, and of course you don't want to say that to a child, so it's tricky, but obviously you need a degree in order to. You don't need a degree. Never mind. These are things it's just prepare, you got to get all your ducks in a row before you're sure you're going to do that. And it's like any job though, Yeah. I mean, and it is that. Let's not, go crazy and say that it's like this passion hobby or an artistic, pastime or something like that. It's a job, it requires creativity and it requires an appreciation for subtlety and nuance and culture and all of these things, but it is a job in the end, just like being an artist is a job, I mean, I see my girlfriend's artists and, it's taxing, it's work, it's, very draining to do what they do all day to make the artwork that they then try to sell, It's not just this bohemian version of, horrible movies you've seen, it's work.
It'd be more fun if it was like that.
It would. So the world would be a much better place if that were the case. And look, if you're born in the money and then you become an artist, I mean, that's a totally different scenario.
That's true.
I think those days are over. When you're sponsored by the Medici or something.
Yeah. Oh man! So that's all the questions.
That was all the questions. Which I got to say, audience, should have written in more.
That's a pretty solid amount of questions, though, in the end.
It was a pretty solid amount of questions, and they were really good questions. Margaret especially. I mean, yeah, those are good questions.
That's solid. So, do you have what is our rant and rave situation this week?
I have no idea, but I felt like I already ranted about the Yahoo app.
So I should rave? I actually have a rave. I had a rave and a rant prepared. My rave is that the new issue of The New Yorker has a James Wood article on Alejandro Zambra, which includes our Alejandro Zambra book, the huge section on it, which may well be the first time that he's read any of our books. So I feel like that's my rave, is that I'm glad that and it's a positive thing that he has to say about it. It's like a few paragraphs, and that's awesome. That's probably the first time that has ever happened.
Well, congrats.
for an open letter book.
Congrats.
So yeah, for that. But I do want to rant about this one thing, because this is the way I can close this stupid tab on my computer and never have to look at this again. Is that I was going through all of the catalogs and updating the translation database last week, and there's a book that was listed called "Things I Want to Punch in the Face." That is a series of rants about things like cold coffee, staycations, jazz music, whatever. And it's like, well, this sounds like something I might be interested in, like a bunch of rants, right? So I went to the woman's blog, and these are the worst rants I've ever seen in my life. Like, they hardly qualify as rants. So here's the rant on cold brew coffee, which people may remember was one of the first rants that we did on here. Was I complained about pretentious coffee and how annoyed I was by the whole thing. So I thought this would be in that vein, right? Okay, here's her rant. Cold brew coffee. Just when I thought coffee culture couldn't get any more precious, cold brew coffee shows up to the delight of coffee snobs and the dismay of pretty much everyone else. The hot drink equivalent of small batch spirits, cold brewed or pressed coffee, is produced by steeping coffee grounds in chilled or room temperature water for 12 plus hours. Hipsters wide and far are queuing up for this new brew, which makes the coffee less bitter, while jacking up my own bitterness, because the coffee beans never make contact with actual hot water. The coffee concentrate can then be heated up and added to milk or water for a supposedly transcendental coffee experience. I hate to throw cold water on this, I'm skipping a bunch here, but if you need a cup of joe to get your rocks off, you might want to rethink things. A sweet cup of coffee is a wondrous thing, certainly, but it'll never beat out a sweet piece of ass. Sip on that.
What?
How does this book exist as like a series of rants? It's not a rant, and it's not good. I was very upset by this.
Wow, wow.
So my rant is about people who can't rant right. Like, you can't do the rant and get it like with the way that rants are set up, where they get increasingly more angry and over the top and like funny and pointed and like useful. Then don't do it. Just don't. Fuck this website. It is now off my computer, and I am happier for that. I've had that open for so long.
Well, glad you got that off your chest.
There you go. I feel much better now. But anyways, I don't have anything else to add, except I do have to get going because I have to go get my kids. So I don't know if you have any last thoughts or comments, but 100 episodes, pretty solid.
Yeah, I felt like maybe we should have been drinking champagne or something like that.
That's true. Well,
hey, can I add one more little rave here?
Yeah.
So my over is getting to Geneva, not cheap.
No.
So the cheapest flight I could get, unless I wanted to go to fucking Moscow and then fly backwards.
Of course.
The worst. I flew through Dublin, which was not bad, totally fine. And on top of that, as you might imagine, the duty-free Irish whiskey is really, really cheap.
Nice.
So we should have been drinking some really cheap Irish whiskey.
Definitely. Well, and tomorrow is Bloomsday. So
tomorrow is Bloomsday.
So it all fits together. It would have been perfect.
Together. I didn't see anyone traveling to Ireland for Bloomsday. That would have been interesting.
That would. I'm going to try and there's no Bloomsday events in Rochester whatsoever I can find. Like, there's not even a bar that lists like a Bloomsday special. So I'm going to try and tweet at them and find out if there is any. But I want to create my own crazy Bloomsday experience tomorrow, I think. It will involve Irish whiskey and Guinness for sure. And then I'm not sure what else.
I definitely had I think I sold 2 copies of Ulysses in French, mind you, like in the past few weeks, because people are like, oh yeah, Bloomsday is coming up. And I was like, good luck. Good luck finishing this in time.
It's not like something you can just read over a night.
No, it really takes some dedication.
Yeah.
Real dedication.
The reading, I've been listening a lot to the Joyce biography and all this Joyce stuff because I've been reading Finnegan's Wake, like you know, and Finnegan's Wake makes Ulysses seem so much easier. When I'm done with this, I'm going to go back and read that, and it's going to be like, oh yeah, this is totally 1,000,000 times easier to comprehend right now than fucking Finnegan's Wake. Oh, Finnegan's Wake is super fun. I actually really enjoy reading it, but I'm at like the hardest chapter in the whole book, so it's a little disorienting.
All right. Anything else? I think that should do it.
I think so too. Sounds good, man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. get some culture, you know?